This week on Obsessed with Wine.
Especially with newer wine drinkers, when they say, I don't really know what I like, getting to kind of help them discover that it's okay if you don't know what you like. That's the beauty of wine tasting. You get to go to all of these places and you may not care for what this winery has, and that's okay. Wine is completely subjective to your preferential taste, and everyone is a connoisseur of their own taste buds. So it's just, to me, it's fascinating just to make people happy in different ways. That to me is the epitome of hospitality, is even when you have to say no to someone, still doing it in a gracious manner.
Hello, fellow wine enthusiasts. My name is Wesley Cable. Welcome to another episode of Obsessed with Wine podcast. I try to have different types of guests on this podcast because I'm fascinated with all aspects of wine and winemaking. This week, I'm so excited to share my interview with Brianna Pickens, the Assistant Tasting Room Manager at Frog's Leap Winery in Rutherford, California. Brianna was nice enough to talk about the 40-year history of the great Frog's Leap and the great wines they produce. But she also answered some of the most common questions about hospitality and wine tasting etiquette that many wine enthusiasts like me think about. Grab a glass of your favorite wine. It's time for Obsessed with Wine. Tonight, I want to welcome Brianna Pickens, Assistant Tasting Room Manager at Frog's Leap Winery in Rutherford, California, to the show. Brianna, I'm really excited to speak to you because you're one of the only hospitality experts that we've had on the show. Most of the time, we do a lot of talks with winemakers. So I've got a lot of questions about hospitality for you. I belong to a lot of wine groups like on Facebook and all over the place. And there's so many questions people ask about, is this okay in the tasting room? So the first thing I want to ask you is just clear this up for me. There was a conversation today on one of my wine groups. The question was, am I considered industry because I have a wine podcast that people listen to? Do I qualify as industry for tasting room and wine discounts? So can you clear that up for me and for everybody else?
I wish that there was a solid answer for you, Wesley. It honestly depends on the winery. There are some wineries I have worked for in hospitality. They are very adamant that podcasts and social media influencers are not industry. They're not even trade. And then there's the opposite end where people say, oh yeah, if you're involved in wine in any form or fashion, you definitely are industry. Where I currently am, we're kind of middle of the road. We definitely say that inner industry is for those that work specifically at wineries or in the cellar or in the vineyard. And then you have trade, which is typically going to be your restaurant and hotel and other mainstream hospitality accounts. We kind of leave it up to the discretion of the manager on duty as to whether or not someone that does podcasts or is a very well-known wine influencer, if they are industry or trade. Every winery is different. So, it's always a good question to ask and, just go in with no expectations, quite honestly.
Yeah, I think it's a fair answer. I mean, I don't have any expectations. I usually pay when I go anyway. I don't usually say, hey, I do this or that to try to get a free tasting. But somebody was asking about it and I said, I don't know, maybe I'd ask Brianna about it. So I think that's a good answer. So thank you for clearing it up. So if I go to Frog's Leap, then I better be ready to pay for my tasting, whatever happen I do. So no problem.
You can always reach out to me and I can see what I can do for you.
Okay.
There is always that when you have, friends that do work in the industry. But currently with our reservation system, especially post, as we're transitioning from hardline COVID to much softer times, we have a new reservation system, which a lot of wineries are going to, called Talk. And that does require you to pay in advance unless you've made special accommodation with the winery in advance. Though it's very easy, just a click of a button, to have your tastings refunded for various reasons.
All right. So Brianna, like I said, let's talk about you first. Okay. Just a little bit about you and how you discovered wine. So I see here that you've got a Court of Master Sommelier certified level 2. Level 2, what does that mean? Does that mean before masters, or is that what it means?
It's definitely well before masters. You have your introductory level, and then you have your level 2, which is the certified sommelier, which I am. And then you have your advanced sommelier, or level 3, and then you have your master sommelier.
Okay, so level 2 is basically before the other 2. It's 2 of 4, I guess you could say. So what got you in to decide that you wanted to go through the process with the Court of Master Sommeliers to get this level 2 certification?
That's an excellent question. Originally my thought process with wine was it was just extra spare cash. I remember I was 19. I had grown up in Sacramento, moved to the Sierra foothills just outside Placerville. I was helping lease a property where I could train horses because that was my first passion, love. And my parents would visit on the weekends. They always liked wine. And so I was their built-in designated driver. Really didn't think much of it, except that they were rather generous. They kind of had a more European style of raising my siblings and I, where they would come home from wine tasting. We could have a small glass of wine in our late teens if we didn't do anything silly afterwards. So I always knew I liked wine, could have cared less. My mother took me wine tasting on my 21st birthday, just kind of as a fun, social, excited thing that now I could actually share in the wine tasting process. And it was the very first small family-run winery up in Fairplay, a tiny winery that sadly they have retired, called Latcham Family Vineyards. Anyone that would listen, my mother would tell them that I needed a job like that on the weekends so that I could get over my shyness, learn how to talk to humans again and not just animals, and, make some extra money. The lady that was pouring wine for us turned out to be Margaret Latcham herself. And the next day she called me and offered me a job. And I thought, well, why not? So fell into it, did it part-time for a little while. And then when I was 22, I had some health issues. I was actually in a pretty massive car accident and I couldn't work for a while and decided to pick up some books on wine. Thankfully, the winemaker at Latcham Family Vineyards, Ruggiero Mastroserio, he was always a big influence and proponent of that the tasting room staff needed to be educated on what wine was. It wasn't enough for him to, even though it wasn't his name on the bottle, that you needed to know what these grapes were and why the wine tasted the way that it did. For wine, I love not just the human aspect from the winemaking and the hospitality side, but I love the science and the art. And I was very fortunate that once I was able to work again after that car accident, a lot of my neighbors were small family-run vineyards and wineries. They were always looking for volunteers. So I, especially with Jim Brown of Sierra Oaks Estate and Vineyards, and like David and Kim Pratt of DK Cellars, got to learn how to prune and harvest and work in the cellar and bottle and, work these different wine events. They were wonderful because they took someone that had relatively no background in wine at the time, except for, pouring wine part-time on the weekends. And they took me under their wing and they taught me so much. And that really helped me to develop a passion for the wine industry. And so when I was 24, having worked for a couple wineries in Amador County at that point, full-time, whether it was in the laboratory, the cellar, and or front of house, I decided to take my entrance exam with the Court of Master Sommeliers and somehow passed that. Then after that, I spent 6 months of basically having very little social life studying because I'd given myself the ultimatum of passing the certified sommelier exam within 6 months. And that I also once again was able to pass. And around that time, due to relationship, moved to the greater Napa Sonoma area. Relationship did not work out, but wine still did. And worked for some wonderful wineries in Sonoma, a couple wineries in Napa, and now I'm at Frog's Leap. But in that time frame, I've also completed my WSET, which is the Wine and Spirit Education Trust, my level 3 exam with them, which is comparative to the Court of Master Sommeliers level 2.
All right. So I've got a couple questions for you. You mentioned Amador County, and that's something that we kind of have in common in the sense that I live near Sacramento, I guess you could say. Amador County is kind of our home wine country where my wife and family, we go there a lot just because it's closer than Napa. And you worked at a couple other places, like you mentioned, before you got to Frog's Leap. So I saw that you worked at Donham Estate, which was one of the wineries, Ramsgate, which is one of the wineries. What did you learn at these places that are helping you today with being the assistant tasting room manager at Frog's Leap?
Oh, goodness, that's an excellent question. And, each place I have worked, whether it was in El Dorado or Amador County or Sonoma or here in Napa, every single winery is unique. Yes, they have the common theme of hospitality and winemaking, but at Ramsgate, it was really fun. It was kind of a cross between a tasting room and a restaurant because they had a full gourmet kitchen that they would do food pairings with. And I know that they still do, as well as kind of like a country club feel. And you had all of these different experiences, simultaneously running in the different parts of the tasting room. And for me, that was just really fun to reiterate some of my past working in restaurants and kind of remembering that, it's not just standing behind a bar, it's proper fine dining table service. And then, staying late and doing these events. It was just so much fun to have the variety. And then at Donham, it was a much quieter property where at the time I was only hosting 3 groups per day. And that included a full tour, not only of the vineyards, the amazing art collection that they have there. Both Ramsgate and the Donham Estate are very Pinot Noir based, which I absolutely love a good Pinot Noir. So that was really fun, especially because I could delve into the different clonal selections and truly geek out on what a finicky grape Pinot Noir is to produce. And then going to Hall that I worked for in St. Helena in Napa the last couple of years, that was a wonderful experience. It kind of reinvigorated my love for Cabernet Sauvignon of all types and styles. And then I came to Frog's Leap. So, I think the main theme about kind of the more popular wine country between Napa and Sonoma is that we see people from all over the world, and having that cultural sensitivity of knowing how to talk to somebody from the state of Georgia as opposed to the country of Georgia. And then someone from Hong Kong, someone from the Philippines, someone from San Francisco, Sacramento, people from New York, LA, someone from Kansas, that they're like, what is this Pinot Grigiois that I'm tasting? Just learning how to interact with different people. My joy is always, especially with newer wine drinkers, when they say, I don't really know what I like, getting to kind of help them discover that it's okay if you don't know what you like. That's the beauty of wine tasting. You get to go to all of these places and you may not care for what this winery has, and that's okay. Wine is completely subjective to your preferential taste, and everyone is a connoisseur of their own taste buds. So it's just, to me, it's fascinating just to make people happy in different ways. That to me is the epitome of hospitality, is even when you have to say no to someone, still doing it in a gracious manner. And it's fun.
I think this would be a good question to ask you, because you've been in different wine regions and worked hospitality in different regions. I hear a lot of people say, I don't go to Napa because it's too snobby. It costs way too much money, and I go to this place or this place instead. So what do you say to those folks who say that? And the reason they say that is they say, hey, I pay $75 to $100 for a tasting, and then I buy wine on top of that. It just gets too expensive. So what do you say to those folks?
I completely understand. I make a good wage, but can I afford a $150 bottle of wine to consume every time I go to dinner? Absolutely not. I understand completely. And there are ways to go to Napa and Sonoma and not spend a small fortune. At the same time, I have been blessed where I've been able to have opportunities to go to those incredibly high-end experiences where, it's $150 per person, $200 per person, non-refundable. And they're wonderful experiences. But at the end of the day, I understand. And I would also caution these people that say, oh, Napa's too snobby, to try us again for two reasons. One, COVID has changed in a lot of things. Most places are by reservation only now, just because we either don't have the staffing or because we've realized that, if you're seeing 2,000 people on any given day and people are packed in like sardines at a wine bar, and you're having to shout and say, hey, this is our Sauvignon Blanc, and you get a quick pour, and that's all you hear, it's not a good experience for our guests. That's something that I still remember very fondly from working in the Sierra foothills, Amador and El Dorado, was that we weren't overrun like a lot of wineries are in Napa. This is not how it was 30, 40 years ago, where you could just pull up to a place and the winemaker would come out and pour some wine for you. Maybe you bought a few bottles, maybe you didn't. 2 Saturdays ago, and we had 215 people on our waiting list.
Wow.
And that has been crazy since all of the restrictions have been lifted with the pandemic. And every single friend of mine and, associate that I have in the wine industry between Napa and Sonoma, they're all saying the same thing. We are seeing people that have not been wine tasting in 15, 20, 30 years showing up going like, it has changed so much. And from an employee standpoint, working in the Napa Valley, when you have all of these people from all around the world coming, it's a glorious and wonderful thing. But at the end of the day, it is a business. If people are just there to have a good time, which I honestly hope that they do, and I want them to. I mean, that's the whole basis of hospitality, is you have a great time. If your goal is to get drunk and not pay a dime, all of these wineries are going to go under. A lot of people don't understand that concept. They think that, oh, well, if you work in the wine industry in any capacity, you must be a multimillionaire. And there's always that joke that I'm sure, Wesley, you've heard of, well, if you want to make $1 million in the wine industry, start with 10 and open a winery. To the effect of people when they say that, oh, Napa is snobby, I would definitely ask to revisit that, because with COVID, we've all kind of had this internal conversation, whether it was within our own winery or with other wineries or just between friends, there are some times that Napa can get snobby and very snooty. I've turned down jobs at places like that because that's just not personally me. And I will tell you, there is a winery for everyone. Where I work, we're called Frog's Leap. Originally, it was called Frog Farm because the original property that birthed the winery used to raise frogs for restaurant consumption back in the early 1900s. And our two founders, they were guys in their mid to late 20s that weren't taking life too seriously. And they thought, hey, what a great name. Today, even our founder, John Williams, he says, life is short. It's no big deal. I get to actually wear jeans to work if I want to. I can't, of course, put holes in them because I am trying to represent a very well-known brand. But where I work, our tasting fees start off at $45. At the moment, they top out at $95. If you buy wine, depending upon which experience it is, we will waive those fees, or if you join the membership. But like our motto at Frog Sleep is time's fun when you're having flies. But, we try to have fun. And most places in Napa have realized with COVID that, it's more about having fun than it is about being snobby and talking about, oh, yes, we got a 98 point wine, which is fantastic. I'm never going to, poo-poo that. It's wonderful when wineries get highly scoring wines. But at the same time, wine is also a byproduct of fermentation. It's a happy accident.
So your job right now, and you just got promoted, so congratulations on that. That's awesome.
Thank you.
So congratulations, assistant tasting room manager. So what are your responsibilities as a tasting room assistant manager? I'm sure there's a lot of things we just don't realize that you really do. So what do you do? What are your responsibilities?
Oh, goodness. At the end of the day, the main thing is my job. I'm responsible for making sure that my team members have everything that they need and that the day functions smoothly. Our hospitality manager, who is my direct boss, Ed Mouse, it is his job to kind of view the whole week going into the month. And then Jessica Haig, who is our vice president, she is kind of in charge of quarterly and yearly viewpoint, along with John Williams, our owner. So for me, I show up and I look around and I talk to both Ed and Jessica and I say, what needs done? We look at the schedule for the day. We assign different sections for the tasting room and for the different tours for who's going to be on what. I make sure that we have snacks ready. Everything is stocked, that fires are put out through the day. If a guest has a complaint, I'm their go-to person. If a staff member has a question or needs assistance with something, I am their go-to person. If we get backed up in the kitchen, polishing glasses and, sanitizing silverware, that's my job. It's not glamorous. People say, oh, you're an assistant manager or you're a manager. That must be so easy. You sit in front of a computer and you get to walk around all day looking pretty. A lot of people think that working at a winery, especially in the tasting room on the hospitality side, is you're doing nothing but standing around talking to people day in, day out and pouring wine. Most people don't realize that there is an awful lot of physical labor involved. For instance, most weekends, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I'm walking anywhere from 5 to 8 miles a day. I'm also going up multiple flights of stairs. I'm lifting multiple cases of 50-pound wine, not just from a cute little wine shelf into a box, but from a cellar that is, 56 degrees temperature, and it's from the ground up, and I'm walking it. A lot of wineries these days, because of COVID or pre-COVID, we're doing tableside service. And so you're not just standing in one place or walking back and forth between like a 5-foot section of bar. You're walking from table to table. You are clearing glasses. You are buffing glasses. I sometimes have dreams where I am buffing glasses. And that's just a normal part of the job that people don't realize. I'm often putting my hair up in a ponytail because I am walking and I am sweating, and my team does not have time to stock wine or go into the library for the library selections that a guest has requested to order. I am that person that is behind the scenes and hopefully makes things work.
I applied one time for a tasting room job because I love wine. I love talking about wine. I can't find anybody who wants to talk wine with me as much as I like to talk about it. So I figured I'd be a good candidate maybe for working in a tasting room. So anyway, I applied for a job. I didn't get it. So whatever skill you have to have, I guess I don't have it. So my question to you is, what makes a good wine educator or tasting room employee? What are some skills that they should have in order to be successful in that job?
Everyone you talk to in the industry that is part of the management or hiring process will probably have a different answer for you. And for me, I just want to say, Wes, don't give up, because I would hire you.
Oh, good.
So if you're ever in Napa, let me know.
I might call you, yeah.
I would, and I'm not in charge of the official hiring process where I work, but I would definitely give you a good word. For me, what makes a good employee is, and this is going to sound kind of silly, but I've had so many people that are my personal dear friends that I've known for years that want to get in the wine industry. They're passionate about wine and their focus is just about talking about wine. But then you ask basic questions of, hey, how do you feel about cleaning a toilet? Do you understand that you can't wear high heels in the tasting room because you're going to be on your feet all day? You may have this mind-numbing task of standing there, taking extra labels and putting them on the bags and taking a stamp and putting thank you or ribbit or something on a bag, that it's not all just talking about wine, that there's some really boring and unfortunate aspects to working in a tasting room. And some of that is polishing glasses, wiping tables down. I always tell people that wine can be taught, even the basics of it, though it always definitely helps the wine industry if you have a passion for wine. But it's the work ethic. And that's what it comes down to, because wineries, tasting rooms, and it's going to be different for every single tasting room, because like I said, I've worked at wineries where you see 2,000 people per day, or conversely, I maybe see 8 people total. So every winery is going to have different hiring criteria. But at the end of the day, you want someone that's going to be a hard worker, that's going to have a can-do attitude. And the more you're willing to learn about wine, not just there on property, but on your own, that to me is the key.
All right. So I want to go back just a minute to Frog's Leap specifically, because of course I've heard of it and I've had some of the wines, but I don't know a lot about it. And so can you just tell me a little bit about John Williams and Frog's Leap, maybe what kind of wines you guys are known for?
Definitely. And I can probably tell you more than you will ever want to know. I always say that Frog's Leap, and I've been working there, like I said, for 9 months now, but I've been a guest there off and on for probably a good 8 years solid. I've always said it's my happy place. It's one of the best kept secrets in Napa Valley, for all that the brand has existed for 41 years. John and Larry Turley started Frog's Leap back in 1981. The story does start with John Williams going back further in his history. He grew up in upstate New York, small dairy town called Clymer, and he was going to Cornell to become a cheesemaker, studying food science to become part of his family's dairy company. One thing led to another. He was paying out of pocket for college, like most of us have, and ran out of funds in his second year. So went to the dean of his department, asked if there was any internships that paid a little bit. And lo and behold, he was able to snag the very last one. At the time, it was a small winery called Taylor Wines in the Finger Lakes region. Today, it is much larger than it was. But it was John's first real exposure to wine, because as he says, his family were teetotalers, and just really kind of blew his mind. Not only was wine delicious, but they were girls, as he will jokingly tell you. And so he decided that cheese was great, wine was better, decided to become a wine maker instead. And because he was so new to the world of wine, joined a few different tasting groups, met a lady at one of these tasting groups named Helen Turley, who informed him that she had a brother in Napa Valley that was a physician, and he had just bought some land. So if John ever got to Napa, she would give him his phone number and a letter of introduction. So John jumped in a Greyhound bus in 1975, got to downtown Napa, which looks absolutely nothing like it currently does. It was basically some old buildings, couple bars, post office, police headquarters. John got there, realized that the letter and address he had said St. Helena, which of course, as you know, is 18 miles up valley. So he hitchhiked, got to the farmhouse late in the day around twilight, knocked on the door, no one was there, and he realized that he had forgot to call and let Larry know that he was coming. So the next morning, after John camped out on that property, Larry showed up on his motorcycle, kind of wondering who this person was. But introductions were made. They became fast friends. And John was able to actually work for that first summer. He was in Napa for a very famous winemaker, Warren Werniarski, Sleep Wine Cellars. John was actually the very first non-family member employee that Warren ever had. And to this day, they're still friends, which is pretty incredible. That was how John got his feet wet in Napa Valley, went back to New York, finished up his degree, helped start a small winery called Glenora Wines. And then he and his wife at the time decided they had had enough of New York winters, came back to California. As time allowed, John did work for Warren, but also finished up his master's in enology, and then got a job as the winemaker at Spring Mountain Vineyards. Then in 81, John and Larry decided to start their own wine brand, which, as I mentioned earlier, they called Frog Farm. After many celebratory glasses of wine later that night, they were like, hey, let's kind of have an in-joke and poke some fun at our dear friend Warren and they merged Stag's Leap and Frog's Leap, even though we've never made wine there, they've never made wine here. A successful partnership for many years. And then in 1994, John and Larry decided to part ways. And John purchased all of Larry's shares in Frog's Leap and moved us to the property that we're currently on. The property we're on is just under 40 acres in the heart of Rutherford. It has been a vineyard/winery since 1884, when the Adamson family purchased it. After many years, it went back to the bank. Several different Napa Valley conglomerates and cooperatives purchased it. John purchased it in 94, and we have been there ever since. And I do hope that you're able to visit, because it is one of the most spectacular properties I have ever been on. We have been certified organic since 1988, and we're part of the very small 3% of Napa Valley vineyards that dry farm. So we're kind of a throwback to what people have done for centuries in Europe. We do not irrigate, which is kind of unheard of in the Napa Valley. But we just feel it makes better wine. It's also much better for the environment.
I love hearing all about that stuff. I think the dry farming thing is interesting. So are all the vines dry farmed, which means there's no irrigation to any of the vines for Frog's Leap wines?
Exactly. Every single vine that we currently have is dry farmed, and it has been a labor of love. Napa Valley really came of age with modern farming techniques. And there's nothing wrong with them. I mean, irrigation is wonderful. You can have more grapes and tonnage per acre. Your vines produce fruit faster, between 3 to 5 years after planting, whereas ours, it's minimum 5 years. We sometimes, after we plant the rootstock, it will take 1, 2, it's kind of unheard of, but with drought being more common than not, it's taking us longer and longer to be able to graft over the European vine on the hybrid rootstock. We're allowing the grapevine to become much more strong and mature before we're actually using it to produce wine. But for instance, per acre, we're saving the equivalent of 40 Olympic-sized swimming pools of water per year. And especially last year, 2021, when we were in such a drought, we jokingly say that we need 16 inches of rainfall to successfully dry farm. And we had 12 inches, which you stop and think about in Europe, Portugal, areas of Spain, that's what they get. So it's doable. Our root systems for our vines are used to being stressed. You would look around the valley and look at some of our neighbors and colleagues, and their vines, because they face water restrictions and were not able to irrigate as much as they normally do, they were looking a little bit tired. Whereas ours looked like normal. We just produced about a third of the grapes that we normally do.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating. I didn't realize that about the dry farming, but that's really cool.
With dry farming, you also get lower alcohol content for your wines. When you're irrigating your grapevines, the berries tend to be bigger, plumper, juicier. That takes longer for the grapes to ripen because of phenolic ripeness, which is the lignification or the browning of the stems and the seed. That's what you want, because if the stems and the seed are green, you get bitterness to the wine. Because we dry farm, our berries tend to be smaller, and when they're smaller, they ripen faster, which means less sugar is produced, so lower alcohols. Most of our wines are going to be around 13.5%, which with global warming, we're seeing that every decade is going up by 1%. But when you consider looking around Napa Valley, especially, some of the wines are approaching easily 15, 16, if not 17% alcohol. So we're really trying to keep that down, because for people like myself, especially that are lightweights, I sometimes like to have more than a glass of wine with dinner.
So I want to move on to the actual wines that you guys produce. Mm-hmm. So you were gracious enough to send me a sample of this Chardonnay, Shale and Stone Chardonnay. Just looking at the information, it says it's surly aged in concrete. Now, I did a kind of a segment on my show about surly aging, what it is, and we also did one on fermentation in concrete. So, tell me a little bit about that and what it does for this particular Chardonnay.
I find this fascinating. I am not a big fan of California Chardonnay in general, because it does tend to be very over the top, very oaky because of the brand new French oak, very buttery from the severe malolactic fermentation that it undergoes. Mm-hmm. And this one has hints of that, but that's not the entire story. So I find that it's actually one of the few Chardonnays I can drink, which I'm very happy about. But with this wine, it is in brand new French oak for fermentation during the first 4 to 5 days. And then we take the wine and we put the wine not into the concrete eggs that people associate with winemaking, but into concrete cubes of all things. Concrete has been used since Roman times for vinification, fell out of favor in the 70s and 80s for stainless steel, which is much easier to produce, easier to sanitize, and easier to transport, plus it's much more cost effective. But back in 2013, John and his son Rory are never people to rest on their laurels. So they went to a company in Sonoma called Sonoma Stone and said, hey, we have this idea. We know you guys make high quality food grade concrete kitchen countertops. We want to do something for aging in concrete. So they came up with a concept of cubes. because cubes store more wine with less dead space. And they really love concrete because it is slightly porous. So you're getting that micro-oxygenation to help the wine develop and mature, but you're not adding any flavors to it like you would with oak, nor is it inert like stainless steel. So it does change the wine, which is quite delightful. And actually our Zinfandel that we produce is seeing more and more of the concrete for aging in addition to the American oak that it sees.
So moving on, so you've got a Zinfandel as well. And in the notes, your Zinfandel says it's a classic field blend style, which I'm not familiar with. So what does that mean?
So it kind of harkens back to how Napa was prior to the 1990s, where everyone suddenly went, oh, we need to have single varietal wines that are 100% pure and single vineyard blocks and things like that. It's kind of how traditionally Napa came of age, where all of the settlers from the gold rush and various times brought cuttings from their family vineyards on the East Coast or the old country and brought them to California. And they kind of had, these different grape varieties planted, and they would harvest them together and ferment them together. So our Zinfandel is going to be 15% Petit Syrah. And Petit Syrah, we find ripens a few days earlier. So we harvest it and we actually put it into one of our stainless steel tanks and pop the refrigeration jacket on so that we do a cold soak, or basically we're leaching all of the color and flavor out of the grape skins into the clear juice without having fermentation take place. And then once the Zinfandel is harvested, we're allowing the grapes to start fermenting with the native yeast, or that white filmy stuff that's on the outside of the grape skin. And then once fermentation is started with the ambient yeast, we take that cold Petit Syrah juice with this gorgeous, lovely, inky color and flavor now, and we're adding that to the Zinfandel, and we're letting them ferment together. You're getting more complexity. You're getting more structure. Because of the co-ferment, you're also dropping the alcohol content. A lot of Zinfandels are approaching 15, 16, 17%. Ours is 14.6, which we're very proud of the fact that we're keeping it restrained. In addition to the Petit Syrah, the fact that we're dry farming it, the berries are smaller, and so there's less sugar. So you're not going to have kind of the more modern take on Zinfandel where you have the very stewed and jammy fruit. It's going to be a bit more peppery. It's going to be a bit more cherry and boysenberry, and then lift it up with that black, kind of that brambly blackberry from the Petit Syrah. So it's definitely kind of an older style Zinfandel, a little bit leaner. Zinfandel is genetically identical to Primitivo. So the style of wine that we're making with our Zin, it is going to be lighter. It's going to be fruit forward, but it's not over the top. And it's one that I honestly take home with me more often than not, because it does pair well with so many different cuisines and, food pairings that I've thrown at it. And it's a people pleaser. It's probably one of the biggest wines the most wines that I sell.
So I'm going to move on to the Cabernet, okay? Because Rutherford Cab is my favorite. So that's my favorite Cabernet to get. Tell me about the Rutherford Cabernet. And the price is very reasonable. For $65 for a Rutherford Cab is incredible. So tell me about that.
Yes. Let me talk about the price point first. So John is a big proponent that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. He would rather people be able to buy his wine than make money off of it. He not only is the type of person that pays his employees what they're worth, but he even has his vineyard crew and his cellar crew employed 365 days out of the year, which is highly unusual. Our vineyard crew is not contracted. Because we're organic, because we dry farm, it's a little bit more complicated. Not that day-to-day vineyard management is easy. And so with the fact that we have 100% estate grown, because we have just over 100 acres of vines in Rutherford, which is unusual for it being just a 6-mile stretch. The fact that we're only charging $65, for the 18 we did, because of inflation and to be able to continue paying the employees a livable wage, we did raise it up to $75 for the 19 vintage that we just released last weekend. But still, most Rutherford Cabernets are going to be minimum $150. But it's John saying, hey, wine shouldn't just be sat on a shelf. People should enjoy it. Because I hear all the time people come in and say, yeah, from this other winery, I saved the wine, for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And then I opened it and it was not good. The thing about wine is it's artwork you have to destroy to enjoy. But at the end of the day, you are worth it, so drink it. Rutherford is situated on the Rutherford Bench, which is the largest alluvial fan in Napa Valley. And that's all of the river rock and gravel deposits over centuries from water trickling down the Mayacamas mountain range and that kind of flooded it in a fan shape there on the valley floor. And the Rutherford Bench is amazing. And the majority of our Cabernet is planted on that. our root systems are going down well past 45 feet, which is unusual. But we know this because many years ago, part of our property that is adjacent to Napa River, during a flood, the bank fell into the water. Floodwaters receded. Frank Leeds, our vineyard manager, was able to go out, but he was able to go out and inspect the riverbank, and he could see that the root systems for the Cabernet Sauvignon was going past that 45-foot drop mark.
Wow.
So you're getting these tiny, intensely flavored berries.
Mm-hmm.
And people always say, okay, so what is this Rutherford dust that we're hearing about? It's a little confusing because people say, oh, it means that the wine smells very earthy, that it smells like dirt, that it's very dirty. That's not actually what Rutherford dust is. That is actually talking about the tannin structure of the wine. And oftentimes when you have your big, bold wines like Cabernet Sauvignon, Syrah, Cabernet Franc, you take a few sips and it feels like you've been sucking on cotton balls all day.
Mm-hmm.
Well, with the Rutherford dust, it's a softer, silkier, smoother tannin structure, which, as John says, and I completely agree, it's like rough velvet on your tongue and your gums. And that is truly what makes Rutherford special.
I'm really excited about this part because as a wine person who loves to go to wineries and taste and all that stuff, and being part of these wine clubs and groups, there's always all kinds of questions that people have about, is this okay to do in the tasting room? Is this okay? What's the rule on this and that? And so I'm so excited to run through these with you. It doesn't have to necessarily be specific to Frog's Leap, but just, in general. Okay. So the first one is about tipping the wine educator. There's always a question of, A, do I tip the wine educator? And B, if I do, is it based on my tasting fee or is it based on all the wine that I purchase?
Excellent question, one that I'm asked very frequently. Mm-hmm. So if you are just going for a regular tasting at a tasting bar and you choose not really to purchase any wine and the person did a great job, please tip.
Okay.
And base it upon your tasting fee, not the amount of wine purchased. Now, if it is a private experience, or it is a private or even a communal tour and or food pairing or something of that nature where it's higher end, definitely tip. It's not expected, but it helps. And I can guarantee you most tasting rooms, your wine educators, wine specialists, wine guides, whatever you want to call them, are not making nearly as much as you think that they are. A lot of places do rely on commission. One of the reasons I love working for Frog's Leap is because they pay you what you're worth, and it's not about commission. There's no rivalry. It is hospitality, so tips are always welcome, but not expected. And if somebody is rude, I personally have had times where I don't leave tips myself. But the rule of thumb is, I'm going to leave something.
I think the question comes more from the people who want to tip, but they're just not sure if that's customary or not. I don't think it's from anyone saying, I don't want to tip anybody, but I think it's a good answer, though. It's a good, clear answer for people who have that question. So the next question, I think you answered earlier, walk-ins at Frog's Leap is a no-no.
At this point, yes, just because, in the past when we had a larger team, the business was run a slightly different way. We were able to accommodate walk-ins a little bit easier. But at this time, especially with COVID and with the mass amount of reservations and people that not just Frog's Leap, but all wineries are seeing, call ahead. If for some reason it's a spur of the moment trip, you haven't been able to call a couple weeks or a few weeks in advance, call them that day and just see. It never hurts to see. Some of your larger wineries will be able to accommodate walk-ins, but the trend I am seeing is that most places are not.
So one question I have for you on the walk-in, if I just want to come in and buy some wine and hang out and drink it, can I do that or no?
You're always welcome to come in and buy wine. We love that. There may be a delay in getting someone to you to help you with that because we typically are so busy. Now, if you want to come and consume wine on property, every winery is going to have different policies and different permits. Currently at Frog's Leap where I work, we are only able to accommodate our tours and tastings. We do not do by the glass. We do not do by the bottle. Other wineries, I know that Honig, which is right next door to Frog's Leap, they're able to do bottle service. They're able to accommodate picnics, whereas we are not. Other wineries, say like in Yountville, because of different permitting, they're able to do by the glass, just like in downtown Napa. So always, if you're in doubt, call while you're there in person, ask a question. But if the answer is no, don't try to push it.
All right. So when it comes to wine tasting, one of my favorite things is when you're having a good time with the wine educator and they've they're doing a great job and they're educating you. And there may be something that's not on the defined tasting list that you want to try. Sometimes they just come out and say, hey, do you want to try this or that? And sometimes you kind of have to ask. But what's kind of the rule on getting to taste a wine that's not maybe on the structured tasting list?
Ask. All you can do is ask. I can guarantee you that at Frog Sleep, we always have at least one extra wine, either for our Frog Fellows, which are our members, that is open, that we consider like an extra splash of, hey, thank you for being here. Mm-hmm. Or it could be a library wine. Or maybe, we had an ultra VIP on property earlier in the day. And for some reason, we have a bottle we don't normally have open. If you're having a good vibe with somebody, your wine educator, or on my side, your guest, and you're feeling that connection where they're appreciating the wine, they're enjoying things. Yeah, I'm going to be happy to be like, hey guys, let me step away. Let me find something. Oh, you're on your honeymoon? You haven't been here in 20 years? Let me see if I can't find something special for us. There are other times where I'm going to be like, okay, no one has listened to a single thing I've said. They're chugging the wine. Mm-hmm. They're being incredibly rude. Mm-hmm. And they ask for more wine. I'm just like, thank you, but no. So, if there's something in particular that you are looking for and you see it on like their library list or something, just always feel free to be like, hey, do you have it open? If not, that's cool. That's okay. But it never hurts to ask. And the main thing is become friends with whoever is pouring wine for you, because that opens so many more doors than if you're trying to be demanding and snobby.
That's a good answer. That's awesome. So as far as spitting the wine out, is that acceptable at Frog's Leap?
I'm going to answer for Frog's Leap, but just in general. So incredibly socially acceptable to spit. Some wineries I've worked at, we provide spit cups or large communal dump buckets. Where I'm currently at, we provide them if you ask for them. I can guarantee you that your host at any winery, if you say, hey, is there something I can spit into or jump into? They will not be offended, because when you work in hospitality, especially pouring alcohol, there is this new thing that the state of California is doing where every single person that pours alcohol, whether it's wine or beer or spirits, cocktails, etc., we must go through responsible beverage service training. And that teaches you, as I've done this, as I've had this training in the past, that your host is responsible if you get drunk and if you go and you get in a car accident, whether or not you hurt just yourself or somebody else. Mm-hmm. Or you could be walking down our front steps or our sidewalk and you trip and fall. If I have served you, whether or not you have been somewhere else or just to where I'm working, and I have served you enough where that could be a factor in the injury that you get or you give someone else, not only am I liable personally, but my company is liable. So we are big proponents of, yeah, you want to spit, hey, if it's not your favorite, feel free to dump it out or don't drink it. And if somebody's offended, that means that they really don't know what they're doing.
So the next question I have is, what is the proper dress code for wine tasting in Napa? And believe it or not, this question is asked more than a lot of these other questions. You tell me, what's the dress code for tasting in Napa?
That's an excellent question. And I have seen everything from ball gowns and tuxedos to pajamas with curlers in a hair, quite literally. I always just say, keep it classy. Don't overdress, but don't underdress. You can always kind of tell the different groups and mindsets of people that go wine tasting. If they're, you obviously don't want to offend anyone. We don't want to see underwear. Also, please wear underwear if you're wearing a dress or a skirt, because things happen and you don't want to share that with the world. Cleavage to a minimum, because I can guarantee you, even if you think that you are okay, you still show more than you think you are. Dress comfortably, but dress classy. And I'm not saying that you need to be in a suit or a dress. You can be in jeans, you can be in tennis shoes. Just be presentable, be respectable. The main thing I would say is do not wear perfume or cologne. Please
I think that's
don't.
a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. I've heard a lot of people say that it really interferes with your senses and in enjoying the wines and getting the most out of that. So I think that's a good point. Don't wear your favorite perfume real heavy or whatnot.
Right. And also, this is something that I've just recently experienced. If you vape or you smoke pot, because that's legal here in California, and hey, more power to you. Don't come in the tasting room reeking of that. Because if you are on one substance, chances are we're not able to pour you wine.
Oh, interesting.
Also, reeking of Mary Jane is not the greatest thing for your fellow wine tasters to smell.
That makes sense. Well, that's a good tip. Actually, I appreciate that. That's good to know. So you touched on this one earlier, but I'm just going to ask you anyway. For people who just come in and they pay the $45 for the tasting or the $95, whatever they do, is it okay not to buy wine? And what I mean by that is, of course, it's okay. But, do the employees look at you sideways or whatnot because this guy's not buying any wine? And, so what, from a hospitality's perspective, how do you look at that?
It is always 100% in any circumstance okay to not purchase wine. I know in the past I had a different feeling where even if I did not like any of the wines that I tried that day, I would do a pity purchase. Mm-hmm. It was like the cheapest bottle I could. And I was like, well, I will regift this for somebody's birthday or anniversary or something. But at the end of the day, anyone worth their salt that works at a winery in hospitality should be giving you the same experience for whatever the tasting fee is, mm-hmm. whether you tip or whether you buy. Because that is, and I don't want to use the word contract, but that is what it comes down to is we are providing a service. It is our job to make you happy. Now, we cannot legally overserve you or do this, but we should be able to give you the same information, the same experience that anyone, I will treat anyone the same way. If you come in, you know nothing about wine, you don't buy a single bottle, you don't tip me, as opposed to people that have been coming to wine country since before Napa was a thing, and they're mm-hmm. buying 5, 6, 7, 10 cases, and they're tipping me hundreds of dollars. Mm-hmm. I'm going to treat you the same way because I don't know who you are. Right. I shouldn't have to wonder who you are. Mm-hmm. And yes, there are some wineries where they get paid on commission. And so they're going to be much more hardline about, oh, you must buy, you must join the wine club because they get commission from that. Also, that's one of the reasons I love Frog's Leap is because it's hospitality based.
One other question I have is, what's the standard pour for a wine tasting? And why does it vary from winery to winery? Some wineries, you get barely even a drop, and at some, they're pretty generous with the pours. So can you comment on that?
Of course. It depends on the winery. And with the various places I've worked, there is no set standard. From my logic, in the 15 years I've been full-time in the wine industry, an ounce to an ounce and a half of wine is standard. Okay. And then you have a flight of 4 to 5 wines, and that equals roughly a glass, maybe a glass and a half of wine, which mm-hmm. sets us within the legal parameters of alcohol that we can serve. There are wineries that give you very little. There mm-hmm. are wineries where I've gone and they will fill up my glass almost to the rim, regardless sure. of the size. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to be politically correct here. The wineries that pour you the most are trying to blanket your taste buds mm-hmm. so they can sell you more. And I've definitely been to wineries where that has happened, where you go to 5 or 6 wineries a day, even the ones that pour very, very little. You go home and months later, you're like, why did I buy this? Why did I waste my money on wine that doesn't taste good? And then others, that do small pours, that could just be their company policy because either they have a finite amount of wine, perhaps they think they have a little bit too much. There is no set standard, but from what I've seen and where I've worked, I would say anywhere from an ounce to an ounce and a half is kind of generous standard. And then on kind of the end where wineries that see hundreds and thousands of people per day, they're going to be doing more like a half an ounce to maybe an ounce, just because of cost and product balances.
So one of the follow-up question I was going to ask you is, I don't think people realize how much wine is poured on a weekend when people go and visit. So can you give us an idea just at Frog's Leap, say on a Saturday, like how many cases do you guys go through just by pouring tastings? Do you know?
I do know because we're in charge of that. We do document that on a daily basis. At the moment, we're seeing around 3 to 4 cases of wine poured. And at this point, we're seeing about 120 people, 130 people per day. Wineries I've worked at in the past where we would see anywhere from 800 to 2,000 people on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, times that by 10. There were days I remember pulling bottles out of bins and just counting and counting and counting. And it would take us an hour to count all of the empty bottles.
It's just a ton of wine that gets poured, which makes sense why they charge. So the time limits. So when you go to a winery, one of the feelings that I particularly don't like is when I feel like they're trying to get me out the door so that the next people can come in. And I totally understand that there's reservations and for a reason. And I'm not thinking I'm more special than anyone else. But what's the right way, I guess, as a consumer to handle those time frames when it says 75-minute tasting or whatever that is?
That's an excellent and very intelligent question to ask. So when an experience says 75 minutes, that is from your first pour to close of the sale. So if somebody says, oh yeah, your experience is about 45 to 60 minutes, that means that it's 60 minutes. That's not when you're just having your last pour. That's hopefully you have had your sale confirmed, whether it's shipping or takeaway, and you've had your last pour. Maybe you've had an extra pour of something to revisit, and you get up to either walk around the property. And that's when I love when people call to reconfirm the reservation, and they say, so what does it mean? What is the time frame? If the tasting is 75 minutes, that is when you are done. You should be finalized. If the experience lasts 2 hours, great. At 2 hours, don't expect that, hey, you can sit here for another hour or two and have more wine, because that table probably has been booked. Most wineries I know of at this point, we have a 15 to 30-minute grace period in between tables so that we can clear it, reset, wrap up the wine, process the shipping order, something like that.
It's too bad it's not that way, but yeah, no, I understand.
It would be nice, right?
It can't be that way. All right, so I have one last question for you, and this one I've heard a lot of. A lot of people say that the wine educators will spend more time with you if they perceive that you're going to spend more money than, say, the next guy. And I know you touched on this a second ago, and you said, we don't do that because we're not on commission or whatnot. But is that a thing?
At a lot of wineries, it most definitely is a thing. It is, because, like I said, a lot of wineries, their employees are paid a very low base rate, and they are expected to make it up on commission. So there is that. But at the same time, even when I have worked at wineries that were like that, if I had a group that knew nothing about wine but were interested in asking lots of questions, yeah, I would completely spend more time with them. Because if you're interacting with your host is going to interact with you more. So never be shy thinking that, because I don't know something, not to ask. I mean, always err on the side of caution and just have fun with it. I will say, when I say have fun with it, try not to be inappropriate. I could spend hours telling you stories of things where it was like, oh boy, just be respectful. And I have a dear friend of mine that is going wine tasting for the very first time in the Finger Lakes region, where he lives this coming weekend. And he was asking me a lot of the same questions. What if they find out that I don't know anything about wine? I'm like, they actually might get excited about that, because they can talk to you about other things. Whereas, a group that has been wine tasting and knows wine very intrinsically and in depth, they might have very little to say about it. So yeah, I mean, just be respectful, be engaged, and be engaging. That's my biggest tip. It doesn't matter if you know you're spending a lot of money, or if you're not going to, just be engaged, because otherwise it's boring for us on our end. We can kind of go through the same 30 to 60, 90 seconds spiel and just be like, yeah, this is this, this is this, this is this. But if you make eye contact and you're engaged and you're asking questions, that's a lot more fun.
So I have one last question for you, and I appreciate your time. And so you're obviously passionate about wine like I am, and like many people are. So besides the wines you drink at Frog's Leap, what are some other things that you drink that maybe everybody doesn't know about and might want to check out and try?
Of course. So one of the few wine clubs I actually personally have, because I love champagne and sparkling wine, is for a small wine bar in downtown Napa called Be Bubbly. And they find champagne and sparkling wines from all around the world. And every time I go there, it is just great service, fantastic people. The last time I was there last week with a friend, they poured us a South African sparkling wine, which was phenomenal. Goodness, one of the best wines I've ever had in my life was several years ago when I was working an event for the Sonoma Valley Vintners Association. One of the hosting tables brought in a bottle of Pinot Noir, and it was a 1977 Hansel Pinot Noir. And I was able to have 2 sips when I helped proof the bottle. Amazing. I don't know why people think that older wine or Pinot Noir in general does not age well, but it was heaven in a glass. Let's see, Sonoma side, some of my favorites. I love Bouchain. Bouchain is fantastic. Their Pinot Meunier is amazing, kind of an underrated sparkling wine grape that is red, but also makes a fantastic still wine. Hansel, like I said, amazing and historical winery over in Sonoma up on the mountains. Stone Edge Farm for Cabernet Sauvignon and white Bordeaux blends, just phenomenal. Can't get enough of them. Oh, and of course, the Donham Estate is gorgeous for Pinot Noir. And then Blue Farm, which was the founder of the Donham Estate, Anna Molenrake, her personal project is called Blue Farm. Very hard to get into, very tiny, amazing wines. Also, Repris up on Moon Mountain in Sonoma, one of the best experiences and tours I've had in my life, plus delicious wines. In Napa, let's see, Fleury is fantastic. Cult Cabernets, higher price point, but some of the best wine I have had in my entire life. And Brian and Claudia do an amazing job. Aside from, oh goodness, there's so many. I mean, I'm like, how much time do you have here? In the Sierra foothills, just because I love to give shout outs to people that, you know, you're not going to find on the main beaten path. The last time I was in Amador County for tasting was with some of my dearest friends. And we went to Iron Hub vineyards for like Zinfandel and Barbera, which Barbera is an underrated grape. Please, if people can try it, do try it. Dick Cooper
I agree.
and Shake Ridge, amazing vineyards. Andis is also pretty darn fantastic. Their Painted Fields blend is one of my go-tos for just every day. I'm trying to think. It's been a while since I've actually, with COVID, gotten out and tasted, which sounds odd since I work in the wine industry. Yeah, there's so many fantastic ones. Another really fun one in Napa with a decent price point and just a very low-key vibe is going to be Goose Cross. And they're just outside Yountville, not downtown proper, but kind of outside. Hope and Grace in Yountville is fantastic. Let's see. Bravana up in St. Helena is great.
Well, that's a good list.
That's my short list.
That's a good list. Usually I get one or two, but thank you for all those suggestions. And a lot of those I'm not familiar with.
I could talk for hours.
I'll take advantage of those suggestions. So Brianna, I really appreciate your joining me tonight for this interview. And I cannot wait to try that Rutherford Cab from Frog's Leap. And when I'm in Napa, I'll check in with you, and it'd be great to come by and say hi and all that stuff. So thank you.
Wesley, thank you so much for having me. And if anyone ever has any questions, reach out to you or me, as you can, contact me or contact me. And thank you so much. This has been so much fun and happy to have been here. Thank you, Wes.
This has to be one of my favorite interviews that I've done for this show. Brianna was so good and honest with her answers that I think anyone who goes wine tasting will get a lot out of this interview. It's so obvious that Brianna is passionate about what she does that I think she found the perfect career in wine. I look forward to visiting Frog's Leap soon and trying that Rutherford Cabernet. Finally tonight, I want to invite you to visit the brand new show website at www.obsessedwithwine.net. There you'll find all past podcast episodes and links to my daily short wine segments called The Daily Taste. Join me for another new episode of Obsessed with Wine podcast every Saturday at midnight Pacific time. I have some incredible interviews coming up that I don't want you to miss. Until then, cheers!